First, go ahead, Eric. Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this very, can I say, unprecedented live event on genetically modified skeptic. I don't do a lot of live stuff, but we're trying out something new. I hope you guys enjoy it. Today I have JJ McCullough, buddy of mine, one of my favorite YouTubers actually, and I thought that we would talk about a whole bunch of different things. I think he watches my videos
I do.
possibly, so we might be on the same page about a few things. Uh, but JJ, tell me about kind of like your recent projects. What have you been working on lately? What did you release recently?
So, for anybody who doesn't know, I tend to make videos about sort of cultural commentary. I do a lot of Canadian commentary, Canadian current affairs, Canadian politics. I do a lot of like US Canada relations stuff. Uh, my most recent video was about the sort of the breakdown of relations between India and Canada. If you've been following that in the news at all lately, there was a assassination of a Canadian national of Indian descent on Canadian soil, who the Indian government accused of being this big terrorist ringleader. And so I did a whole video sort of deconstructing that whole sort of affair and sort of the history of Indo-Canadian relations. And that,
I'm sorry, you said deconstructing and then you kind of went silent. Can you repeat that for me?
like, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I'm not hearing you at all, actually.
Oh, hold on. Let me just try something quickly.
Oh,
1 sec. 1 sec. Hold on.
oops. Okay. Sorry, guys. I do have Eric Murphy from Skeptic Generation. And he's gonna try to work this out. Okay, here we go.
Here we go.
JJ.
Hey, here I am.
Yeah. This was a fun little gimmick that we
A fun little bit, eh? I think it went over well.
Yeah, I think you did well. This guy's got a lot of like live TV experience, so he knew what he was doing there. But go on. You were deconstructing this whole Canadian political debacle.
I mean, actually, I guess it might be of interest to your viewers. I was talking about how part of the reason why sort of Canadian Indian relations have broken down recently is that Canada has a sort of significant Sikh population. A lot of the Indo-Canadians who live in Canada are of the Sikh faith. And unfortunately, there has been some sort of Sikh extremism in Canada, Sikh radicalism, sort of involvement in radical Sikh terrorist politics. And this has been a sort of sore spot in Canadian Indian relations over the years.
I think we actually have a real issue here. You're saying it's a I want to make sure that I'm not just having this mic come in here. We may have to end up sharing this guy.
Sharing mics.
But let's try that. Let's try that for the time being.
Let's get cozy and share microphones. Yeah.
Okay. So go on. This is a heady topic here.
Yeah. But I mean, so historically, there has been a lot of Canada has had a very large Sikh population. There has been sort of accusations that Canada is a hotbed of Sikh radicalism, Sikh terrorism. There have been Sikh extremist terrorist attacks in both India and Canada. This has led to a kind of breakdown of Canada-Indian relations over the years, and it sort of reached a climax, a nadir, when a Sikh Canadian national, a Canadian citizen who had immigrated from India, was assassinated. Was killed in a sort of targeted killing in the temple where he was the president of the Sikh temple. And Prime Minister Trudeau recently made a very dramatic announcement that he believed that this assassination was in fact carried out on the orders of the Indian government. And the Indian response has been to like simultaneously deny that they were responsible, while also sort of implying that, this fellow had it coming because, he was this terrorist ringleader in Canada, and Canada has never sort of held up its end of the diplomatic bargain in terms of, extraditing him or, arresting him or whatever else. So, I mean, it might be interesting to your viewers just in the sense that I think of all of the sort of the religious radicalisms that we think of, we often don't think about sort of Sikhs as being...
Right, and I think a lot of us take kind of a more defensive posture about Sikhs because typically they're very peaceful people that get grouped in, just because their religious garb is so visible for the men. I think they get, ignorantly grouped in with like a of like radical that American, xenophobia like
Yeah.
tends to grasp onto. And so yeah, my defensive or my posture toward like Sikh populations has always been very defensive. So to hear
Yeah.
like that there is some legitimate radicalism in a certain part of it, the Sikh population, is almost surprising and like bursts a bubble for me, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, there are some sort of folks I know in sort of the atheist kind of world who argue that like all sort of religious believers or all religions are kind of prone to extremism or sort of intolerance or sort of odious sort of belief systems and all of that. And I mean, I don't believe that as a sort of overarching principle, but definitely I think that no matter what religion you're looking at, there will always be a sort of fundamentalist faction. And oftentimes we know that religious factionalism or extremism often tends to correlate with violence and political radicalism and that sort of thing. And the Sikh community is no
Okay,
different.
I need to interrupt
Yeah.
legitimately here. Chat, please let me know what's going on with the audio. I saw it was too quiet, and then it's bass boosted and clippy. How are we doing right now going off of this? Do we like the audio here? Do you want me to turn it a little bit up or down? I want to make sure that this is not like obnoxious to listen to. Let's
Like,
see.
can you read the comments from here?
Yeah, I can.
Oh, you have better
I'm
eyes
seeing
than I do.
perfect, good, yay. I need more. The sound is okay. It's fine now. Okay, it's good now. Okay, okay.
It's a little too close to Drew,
It's a little too close to me, which makes
and
him
I'm a little too loud.
speak into
Speak
here.
into this one. Is it better if I talk into this microphone? Much better. Okay. All right.
Much better.
I
Okay.
I very much enjoy being in the fabulous genetically modified Skeptic studio, which is every bit as majestic as it appears on camera. So
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, do let me know, guys, if this audio is not working out, because I don't want people to be offended with their ears. We just need JJ
closer to his microphone.
to love the microphone
Oh.
there. So all right, yeah,
All right.
we'll keep going
Okay.
with everything there. But as you were saying, let's continue.
As I was saying, yeah. No, I mean, well, what is your sort of take on that? Do you believe that like every religion will sort of inevitably have a fundamentalist faction, and thus that fundamentalist faction will be prone to political extremism and violence?
Yeah, so I mean, the classic counterexample is if you're defining fundamentalism in the way of saying that, fundamentalism is them taking a literal interpretation of their core doctrines and really ramping it up to the nth
Yes.
degree. The counterexample is, well, extremist fundamentalist Jains would be extremely peaceful.
Mm.
But I don't really see, I think that that's a narrow way of thinking about fundamentalism. I don't think that we should view fundamentalism or dogmatism within the view that we might place Christian fundamentalism.
Mm.
So with Christian fundamentalism, it's very much like hyper literalistic,
Yes.
right? So if we take that view and we project it onto fundamentalist Sikhs, we would say, oh, they take their teachings very hyper literally, and they're ignorant about more liberal or metaphorical interpretations of like some text. But I don't think that that grafts on neatly to Sikhism or even to most religions. Like maybe it does to Islam, but that's all. The way that I see fundamentalism really has a lot more to do with intense tribal dynamics. So I do see like Sikh extremism as being this really fierce in-group mentality.
Yes.
And I think this is a better way to think of fundamentalism more globally. Like it is defending the in-group at the expense of everything else.
Yes.
And of at the expense of being reasonable or having any kind of diplomatic relations with the outside world. And so it can get there's a lot of posturing, there can be a lot of aggression, even if the core, the core theological grounds of the religion are not themselves violent. Like Zen Buddhists or like Buddhists in Myanmar don't have violence in their texts or in their doctrines, right? However, when dealing with Muslim populations coming in and disrespecting Buddhist customs, there have been Buddhist leaders that have not commanded, but like encouraged violence
Yes.
in defense of the Buddhist people and Buddhist traditions. And I don't think they're doing that because they're like, Buddhist tradition says this.
Yeah.
I think they're doing that because human psychology inherently says protect the in group.
Yes, yes. And I think
And
that very much tracks with sort of the Sikh fundamentalists, right?
mhm,
Like I don't know a lot about Sikh teachings, I must say, but what I do know about Sikh radicalism as it has been practiced in Canada and has led to terrorism in Canada, it's all based around the idea of what they call like Khalistanism,
mm,
which is the idea we must establish a separate Sikh homeland in India that is free of sort of Hindu oppression, free of the oppression of the sinister Indian government and all that kind of all the violence is justified less like when we think of like the Sikh fundamentalism, they're like fundamental about being Sikhs and being Sikhs as something independent from the rest of India, independent of the rest of the world, and yeah, defending the boundaries of the in group and sort of creating a sort of sense of purity and purity
right,
of purpose and purity of identity and that sort
right.
of thing.
Yeah, hopefully that is a coherent like understanding of of fundamentalism for people. I feel like, I really don't like the way that like Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens talked about fundamentalism. Uh, they always saw it as the most simple reading of the book.
Yeah.
And like I said, that tracks for Christianity and maybe for Islam, but really for like no other religious faith. So if we want to talk about extremism using this like really wonky fundamentalist terminology, I don't think does us any good. It just makes it more confusing. So I'd rather just use the word like tribalism or
Tribalism.
extreme tribalism
Yeah, yeah.
or extreme groupishness. I feel like that gets to the point of the matter
And it
better.
makes sort of like religious fundamentalism, religious chauvinism seem much more like of a part with other sort of secular extremisms, which Sam Harris has like I think conceded, right? Like he has said, for example, like communism, like say of the North Korean variety, even though that's not literally a religion, it can have a fundamentalist character, and same with like Nazism and this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like they're just extremist totalizing belief systems, but even then, that might not actually disprove the argument that you're making, where you're sort of saying, like, in some ways, it doesn't really matter what the belief system as a philosophy is,
Yeah.
as long as there's an in-group versus out-group sort of mentality.
I would recommend you guys out there watch the HBO series called Raised by Wolves, and it's like this dystopian future where there's this big church that's kind of like really violent Mormonism, but it's called like Mithraism, or the Church of Mithra or something. And basically, this church has kind of taken over Earth in the future, and the atheists, basically anybody who's not that sect, has radicalized and started using like child soldiers and stuff to fight against the religious dominance of this like fundamentalist kind of pseudo Christian sect that's taken over the world. And yeah, so I think that show exemplifies the idea that it's really group dynamics and not religion itself that makes people act in this extreme way. And religion's just very, very good at making groups. And so that's why religions as group structures might be something that builds extremism a little bit faster than like secular ideologies. Like
Mm.
humanism is not very good at making cohesive community in the first place, which is probably the reason it's so bad at making extremists.
That's interesting, because that sort of gets to something that I kind of wanted to ask you about, right? Like, is is sort of like is culture and cultural identity, is that potentially as dangerous? Well, I shouldn't say as dangerous as religion, because that presumes that. But it's like whenever a group sort of, let's put it this way, whenever a group has a very firm cultural identity, whenever there's a large group of people that are very into being a part of that cultural group, whether that's a nationalistic group or like any other sort of like tribal group you can think of, is that a cause for concern? Is that something that we should keep an eye on?
I just I don't think that it's possible to. I mean, I've talked about religion and social structuring, all these things. They're technologies. Like
Yeah.
religion is a technology, it's a tool. And so I just don't know that you can introduce any technology without introducing the idea or the possibility of its abuse. I mean, we introduce agriculture in order to have a steady food supply and grow our populations larger, but it led to malnutrition. And you could actually argue that it eventually led to all of the social ills that we have now. Like climate change could eventually be a disastrous, natural disasters, like could be a result that you could argue is the inevitable result of agriculture on a large scale. And so I like to think of agriculture and religion as analogous in that way, as these tools that are massively influential in the way that humans interact with each other, and the way that history is shaped. So it's my roundabout way of saying that, like, I just don't think that you can build a culture that's immune to extremist tribalism, um, just inherently. I think that if you make a social structure that's not all that great at getting people to act as one in the first place, and I think like secular humanism is one of those, I think that it's much less likely to create an extremist. And I think that like Sunni Islam is very good at getting people to cooperate with each other, but it's very good at getting people to cooperate with each other, and maybe not as much with people on the outside. So that's my roundabout answer to that. I should say we're only doing this for like probably an hour or so. Sorry about the autofocus. Again, we're working out like all the kinks and things. I need to switch to like manual focus, but this is what we got right now. We will be taking super chats at the end. I'm going to ask JJ a couple of questions. I'm sure he'll ask me a couple of questions. But then like the last 20 or 30 minutes, we want to just kind of take super chats. So you guys can go ahead and get those in now. We can't probably take like just stuff from the chat because we're not going to be doing this for very long. So get your super chats in. I'm going to tip the producer, Eric from Skeptic Generation, at the end based on super chats. So yeah, get that in there. Eric says yay in the back end. But JJ, I wanted to ask, when people work with me, like larger YouTubers like yourself work with me, I'm always kind of surprised because I still see my work as kind of controversial or very controversial in a way. And people, when I tell them about this just in public, like strangers ask me what I do for a living, and I say YouTube, and they say, what's it about? A lot of say what it's about, they kind of recoil. So like, why would you be willing to even come on here?
Well, I mean, I've been a long time enjoyer of your content. Okay. I think you're a very calm and rationalistic, sort of serious intellectual. A lot of qualities you have that I look up to and that I admire and that I, want to have in myself. So no, I feel like I see you as a peer and somebody who, again, like embodies values that I hope to embody. So yeah, I don't think of you as a controversial person. I think actually that you and some of the other sort of, quote unquote atheist YouTubers are actually sort of embodying a new sort of style of atheism and atheist activism, and just sort of like, maybe even that's sort of too narrow, like a sort of a new way of engaging with religion in a secular world, and sort of making the case for how we can engage with religion and how we can tackle sort of questions of religious fundamentalism and religious dogma and all this kind of stuff. Like, and you model that well, like, because you are, I think, respectful, and you're not the quote unquote like angry atheist type, right? Even though I know you've got some haters that might disagree with that perspective. But no, I think what you're doing is valuable, because I really actually do think that, particularly in an American context, that the question of how we're going to engage with religion in the 21st century, and the intersection of religion and culture and religion and politics, I think these are very, very important questions that I think deserve sort of serious takes and serious analysis, which you offer. So,
well, I appreciate that. I definitely think that I started as more of a polemic channel, and you started your kind of like political commentary career as more of a polemicist as well. And the thing that really made me feel like I related to you was, that like that was kind of your former career, and I was trying to come out of that around the time that I found your channel. So we're like-minded in that way and in that experience. But okay, so many people are asking about like, what does JJ think about like religion and things like that. So I want to ask, the big question that the title
Mhm.
asks, like, what is your religious background? Like, what's your deal with religion?
What's my deal with religion personally? So I don't know. I feel like I was raised in a relatively sort of secular way. Both of my parents actually, especially my mother. So my mother is an immigrant from Holland, and she was raised in like a very like strict kind of Calvinist environment. When she emigrated to Canada with her family and her six brothers and sisters, and they grew up in like this little kind of like isolated part of rural Ontario where they only hung out with other Dutch immigrants who were equally like strict and Calvinist, just
Mm,
like they were. My mother has this line that she often uses, how like when she was growing up, she envied the Catholics because they seem to have all the fun. So like it was very much like, like you don't wear colored clothing, and any of the, like my grandmother and grandfather wore, traditional drab Dutch clothes without
yeah.
any color and all that. So, and my mother kind of, I think, rebelled against that pretty strongly when she moved out to the west coast of Canada, where she met my father and all the rest of that. And my father came from a very sort of strict Catholic family. He went to Catholic school and all of that. And so both of my parents were, and yeah, my father in turn kind of rebelled against that and sort of opted out of that when he also moved to the West Coast where he met my mother. And so both of my parents came from pretty strict kind of religious upbringings that they were eager to kind of like opt out of. And so like me and my sister were raised in a fairly secular way, but at the same time they did still kind of push a certain notion of God on us, and a certain notion that we should be grateful to God, and we should do things like have little prayers and say grace and be grateful and
Yeah.
God's blessings and that sort of thing. And to some extent I still think that way. Like honestly, like when I was growing up and even into adulthood, and that like I would think and do little prayers and like sort of thank God for when things were going well in my life,
Yeah.
and sort of stuff like that. And even though it's not like a rational thing to do, I still kind of feel like that's something that has, because like I believe very strongly in like gratitude, and I think it's very important to be grateful as we go through life, because we are very fortunate and we are very blessed people in some ways. And so I don't know, like having rituals in which you can engage with sort of acts of gratitude, I think is very important. And to me, I guess that's kind of like the role that a certain conception of God has always played in my
Mm,
life. Less maybe sort of like God as like the active, architect of life, or God as sort of the man who sort of institutes the rules of moral and righteous living, and more just kind of like God is sort of embodying a kind of force in the universe that we associate with things that go right,
yeah.
you know?
Okay.
So I don't know. That's basically sort of the faith tradition, I guess you could say, that I was raised on, which was,
Yeah.
I don't know, is that deistic without necessarily being religious?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think that that's just North American cultural Christianity. It's not
Mm,
so much focused on the metaphysical as much as the ritual, and like this general attitude of valuing virtues that might be called traditionally Christian.
mm,
And in that way, I can kind of relate. I think that, you know, for me, I still do take a lot of my moral lessons from different stories about the life of Jesus and things, even while I'm like outwardly call myself an atheist and I kind of
yeah.
identify with that tribe. But just on that note, you and I are both these people who, and I think that you've been a lot more open about this.
Yeah.
You seem to act and speak as if temperance is a virtue,
Yeah.
and if there was something particularly like religious
Yeah.
about you, it might be
Yeah.
your own temperance and moderation in
Mm,
life. Like you don't drink alcohol, you don't even do like caffeine,
yeah.
and you're very studious and structured in your life and responsible.
Yeah.
Uh, I guess my questions would be why why be that way, and do you have fun?
I don't have much fun these days. I feel I'm just so busy working on my YouTube videos all the time. But I think there's a couple of factors in that. I think probably some of it is just the faith tradition that like my parents raised me in. They both came from relatively strict sort of religious upbringings, and so I think that my parents were not like, I think, overly strict, but I think they really did push the idea of like being disciplined and not indulging in sort of, you know, quote unquote, sort of like sinful, sort of naughty things. They wouldn't have framed it as sinful, but like there was always a lot of like, you know, bad people do this and you're not a bad person, so
Right,
you'll do
right.
that. And actually, there was a theory that I learned. So like I'm a gay man, and one thing have learned recently is that there's this whole theory of sort of like gay kids that grew up in sort of homophobic times, as I did. You know, I was born in 1984, so I kind of grew up in the 80s and 90s, which was, you know, compared to now, quite homophobic, not as homophobic as previous decades, but still kind of rough. And there's this idea of what they sometimes call the best little boy in the world sort of theory, which is this idea that like sometimes like little gay boys who realize that there's like something wrong and bad about them, they sort of deal with that or sort of try to compensate for that by being super good every other way, like
Mm,
being a super good student, being a
mm.
super good son, being very loyal to the rules and very diligent and not being naughty and not being sort of rebellious. And I think that was a big part of my upbringing. If I look back at it, you know, with some degree of critical detachment, not so much my upbringing, but that was like a big part of my sort of sense of self. And yeah, I didn't want to drink because bad kids drank, and I didn't want to, you know, get detention because that's what bad kids did. So I was like just very by the book and by the rules. And then as I got older, that kind of morphed into a kind of like political, like conservative philosophy that
Yeah,
I then used to rationalize my behavior further. And yeah, and I think that now I'm just very used to living that way.
yeah.
Like I just live, and I now I sort of rationalize it because I do think it has yielded positive results for me. Like I don't think I have any reason to regret not having had a drink. I've never had alcohol in my life.
You do get a lot done.
Well, yeah, and you know, I feel like I'm healthy, like better health. You know, I'm not dependent on caffeine. You know, I don't have any criminal record or like all these other kinds of things. So, like, I feel like I'm doing pretty well. And I think the thing that I like think about now when I think about it is that I like being reminded of how much agency I have over my life.
Mm.
I feel like when I tell people that I don't drink, which is like the most controversial thing about me, a lot of times people are like, oh, you know, why not? Everybody drinks. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, sort of like, I have to justify not doing something. Whereas I feel like everybody else should have to justify the fact that they are doing this thing to me.
Mm.
And people don't like being reminded that they have agency. Like, people don't like being reminded that they are choosing to drink. Like, it's not that I am doing the weird choice. Like, from my perspective, they're doing the weird choice. And people don't like to be reminded of that. People would like to think that they're just kind of going with the flow and just doing what quote unquote everybody does. They're just doing the normal thing. And I kind of enjoy that. Like I enjoy being different because it reminds me that I'm
Yeah,
ultimately in control.
yeah. A huge thing about you is that you do have the good little boy syndrome, but you're also kind of by nature very much contrarian. So, yeah, how do you square how do you square that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people do say I'm a contrarian a lot. I don't know. I don't feel contrarian. I mean, I have like strong opinions. Like I have strong like principled positions that I take on things, and maybe I'm sometimes like kind of rigid about those kind of positions. But I feel like in some ways, like I still am like quite conservative in a kind of small c way.
Mhm.
Like I said before, like I try to be very grateful. And one way that I'm grateful is that, you know, I try to, I don't know, appreciate the status quo in some way. Like before I criticize things, I try to understand why it exists.
So no revolution for the sake of revolution for
No,
you.
no. I guess like you could say like I'm like a Burkean conservative. I'm a Did you know that I'm sure you do because you're so learned, like the Chesterton's fence sort of thought
Yeah, I
exercise?
think you're thinking too highly of me. You got to explain
Well,
this.
there's this idea. It's in like philosophy where it's like, you know, like two guys are walking in the you know, the farm or something in the middle of nowhere, a grassy valley, and then they come across this fence and it's not attached to anything. It's just a fence in the middle of the field. And then it's like, oh, this fence is in the way, we should tear it down. And then the other guy's like, no, perhaps this fence is here for a reason, we should defer to the judgment of whoever placed it there,
Ah,
right?
okay.
And so like I feel like I often have that kind of disposition. Like something exists, I feel like before criticizing it, I'm inclined to be sort of deferential to it. And that
Okay.
can make me seem like a bit of as my buddy J Reg would say, like a status quoist, like too
So
defensive
so
of.
in that vein, then you would agree that the Liberal Party is the natural ruling party in Canada.
In Canada.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, the Conservative Party is, you know, it's one of our two major parties. So I mean, I'm at least
it's
being a little.
it's one of the two, and the Green is not far away. And
No, see, like the Green,
MVP is only fourth.
the NDP, yeah. Well, I mean, we should support the existing party structure, right? I mean, the Green Party is like a rebellious new party that has emerged and is, and like, and I can even rationalize it that way because I often sort of say, like, you know, in Canada we have a pretty robust, you know, three-party system. That should be enough to satisfy you. If you have to vote Green, like maybe you're a little spoiled, a little ungrateful for like the bevy of options we're currently offering you, you know. So
I don't know. I think that I know far less about the way that politics works in a very like concrete way. Like I know very little about the way that legislation actually works or how political parties are, especially how political parties are formed, and especially in Canada.
yeah,
So it's hard for me to challenge that. I feel like I think that my temperament, like your temperament may be you know, small c conservative, and mine is like small l liberal.
yeah,
Like I don't think that I would have gotten along with the flower children of the 60s very
yeah.
well, but at the same time, I don't really fit very well into I don't have a conservative temperament. I'm
Mm.
very much like open to experience and to like all types of people. And so my like natural inclination is to be like, let's have more choices for
Yeah.
political parties, and the most popular few will always get to the top, but let's not limit anyone, you know. But that's, it's in no way like a practical edict, me saying that.
What was your sort of political upbringing like? Like you talk a lot about your religious upbringing, and it's interesting because
Yeah.
I know that sometimes we think of like fundamentalist Christians, we think of that being synonymous with evangelical Christians, which it's not, right? And I think a fundamental of opting, certainly in Canada there is a fundamentalist tradition of opting out of politics altogether, like seeing the political realm as like worldly and sinful and, you know, just
Yes.
inherently like, yeah, just engaging in. But then of course there's the evangelical tradition, which is of course very politically engaged, although that's a relatively new phenomenon too. So what
Yeah.
was your kind of.
Oh, I mean, you, in your question, you encapsulated how like contradictory this kind of thing can be. So I've talked about how I was raised with this highly ethical form of Christian fundamentalism. You know, we would never put it in political terms like anti-capitalist, but we were very much of the idea that the like money is the root of all evil, or the love of money is the root of all evil, and that politicians are very much bought and sold. And we wouldn't have said something like they're controlled by lobbyists or corporations. We'd just be like, they're rich, and rich people have bad morals.
Mm,
And so we kind of had a lot of love for the common man,
yeah,
for poorer people and middle class people, uh, and the way that people could reason, oh, then naturally you should support like democratic socialism, or naturally you should support Republicans because it's more kind of a populist party.
yeah,
You can reason any way you want from that theology, honestly, but what it came down to practically was we had these Christian morals that had to do with our inner experience, our inner life, and the way that we treat individuals. And then our culture, being in Texas and being white and middle class, dictated that we voted conservative. You know,
mm,
we voted exclusively for the Republican Party and believed, honestly, batshit insane conspiracy theories about anyone that was not Republican.
yeah,
So my parents were constantly telling me, you know, money is the root of all evil. And Drew, you should not strive to be monetarily successful, but spiritually successful. By the way, Rush Limbaugh is an incredible man, an incredible political commentator. And my parents kind of learned about politics from political pundits like that.
was abortion a big thing to you guys?
Yes, like definitely. But I don't remember all that much talk about it in my home because my family and everyone we would ever associate with would also have the same position as us. So we never had like debates about whether or not abortion should be completely illegal
Yeah,
and
yeah.
criminalized even, because everyone thought that it was just murder and people should go to prison for life
But was it, I
for it.
mean, I more meant like in the sense that, because I think a lot of like evangelical Christians, I really do think in some ways abortion is the most sort of salient issue in American politics today, just as sort of the calibration point, because a lot of evangelical Christians, before anything else,
Yeah.
justify their support for Republicans, their support for Trump,
Yeah.
you know, and their hatred of Democrats on the basis of abortion. And
Yeah.
so as a result, like, you know, when you go to these evangelical mega churches and stuff, like they'll talk very explicitly about that, like, you know, vote
Right.
abortion, right? Even in the Catholic churches that I attended with my grandmother, like they would be pretty explicit about that. Like, this is the defining issue of our time, and your political opinion should revolve around that.
I will say that, you know, with Biden being so kind of like centrist
Yeah.
in even among like Democrats, I think the justification for my parents voting for Trump was that he was, you know, he said he
Yeah.
was, or at least he was willing to say that he was anti-abortion, and so they hated Trump. They always hated Trump, but you know, my family were not like Trumpers. They were like, oh, good, he's out of there. But oh,
Yeah.
now Biden, who might be even worse.
Hmm.
Yeah, they just saw him as the lesser of two evils
Hmm.
and thought that all the choices were bad choices, but at least the somewhat like anti-abortion. You know, I don't really think that Trump has like genuine convictions about abortion,
Yeah.
but the fact that he would be anti-abortion outwardly and would appeal to that made it to where it's like, okay, that's the decisive issue.
Yeah. So your folks were sort of the I feel like a community of Christian that is sort of overstated in terms of relevance in modern American politics, which is like the transactional Christian voter, like the voter that
Yeah.
sees Trump as like this imperfect vessel, but we must support him because, you know, he'll get the judges appointed that will overturn Roe v. Wade and all the rest of that.
Yeah. I am seeing that we probably should get going on super chats. We have a few lined up. We can probably get to more than we have right now. So you guys, yeah, if you want to ask more questions, we'll go ahead and start now. But there'll probably be time for a few more.
Oh, look at this. This is quite the
Wow.
swanky setup you've got here with the questions
Yeah,
right
thank
on the
you,
screen.
Eric. Okay, question for JJ. You want to read that?
Okay, question for JJ. So much of your content focuses on American culture. As a self-professed admirer of American culture, have you ever seriously considered moving here? If so, where? I have considered moving in America. I think I would like to live in America, not necessarily forever, but I think it would be a good experience that would sort of like enrich me and sort of enrich my ability to be a useful commentator on American culture. I do think, you know, this one of my sort of thesis points of my sort of worldview is that Canada is part of American culture, that Canada is a kind of extension of American civilization, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think Canadians should be a little bit less insecure about that objective reality. But at the same time, you know, America is also where the stuff happens. You know, Canada is a sort of more reactive component part of the American sort of cultural, you know, project. So as a result, I feel like if I was to live in America, I would really want to live in a place that feels like is like the center of American culture and the center of American cultural development, I should say. So like living in a place like California or living in a place like New York, like that is attractive to me to really like, because whenever I've been in California or when I've been in New York, I feel like, okay, like this is where it happens, right? Like this is like what it feels like to be in the center of the universe.
You're a city boy too, so
I am a
like,
city boy.
would you live somewhere like Manhattan?
I mean, like it's attractive to me on some level. I definitely feel like every time I've been in New York, as exciting and exhilarating it is, and as stimulating as it is, it feels like it's for a kind of person that I'm not sure I am. You know, same with LA. Like these
Yeah.
are cities that are for a certain type of person, and that's probably one of the reasons why I don't live in these cities and why I can just talk a good game about it. It's also, it should be said that it is hard to move to America. Like it's immigration is difficult, and particularly when you're a self-employed YouTuber, you know, the sort of visa opportunities that are open to you are pretty narrow. And I guess I'm just so busy with so many other things that, you know, and my life in Canada is good, all things considered, right? Like my desire to like live in America is like a very abstract one, right? Like it's not being driven by any sort of like material circumstance or even like career opportunity or anything like that, the way it is for most Canadians that move there. So, you know, it's something that's, yeah, I wouldn't say no if the opportunity presented itself. I would absolutely be eager to do it, but at the same time, like it's just, I have to sort of make peace with the fact that it's clearly not that much of a priority, or it would have been done by now.
After having mango nava and elotes and actual street tacos for the first time today, would you consider Austin, Texas?
Texas is pretty great. Like, I've enjoyed all my times that I've spent in Texas, and this city of Austin is pretty wonderful as well. And God knows, like, the weather is just such a huge asset too. Like, you can't understate how attractive so much of American weather is to a Canadian.
Well, just wait until you come here during their month of July.
Mm.
You'll eat your words, and I mean, you'll probably sweat. You'll sweat out every brain cell that you have, and then you'll drink that. Yeah, but okay, let's go on to the next one. All right, Drew, favorite flag? Also, just talk flags, please.
Nice.
Oh, I have such a boring opinion about this.
Do you?
So, a lot of people really don't like when flags are not perfectly rectangular, because it makes it difficult to standardize.
Mm.
But I think that it can give them a very distinct look when they're actually flying up on a flagpole, which is where I feel like I interact with flags the most.
Makes sense.
And so I really, really like Ohio's flag.
Oh,
Yeah, it looks like you're celebrating 4th of July or something
Yeah.
like that. I think it's a really simple and kind of iconic design. It looks like you're either celebrating or it's like some kind of battle flag. And then
Yeah.
you're like, oh, what is this? This is so interesting. And then it's just Ohio.
Yeah.
It's just Ohio.
Just Ohio.
Yeah. And I mean,
Always has been.
it always has. I also really like Ohio as a place.
Oh, yeah.
And so I'm partial to that.
Mm.
But I think I also like New Mexico's state flag.
Yeah, it's very elegant. It was rated the best flag in North America some years ago by the North American Vexillological Institute.
Okay.
So,
all right.
good taste. I mean, the flag of this state is quite lovely as well. The Texas flag is very iconic.
Yeah.
Recognizable.
We went to the state capitol today and he saw lots of Lone Stars and lots of Texas flags everywhere.
I bought a little book all about the flags of Texas.
Yeah.
The evolution of that. Yeah.
That was fun seeing you. I was like, wow, he really doesn't phone in his interest in flags. Like, we're standing in the middle of the gift shop, like blocking these tourists' way because he's rifling through the flag book.
Yes.
That was fun. All right. Next question here. All right. I have been reading A History of God, a book that delves into the evolution of monotheism. The gist I've gotten is religion changes to fit people's needs. Do you agree? How does fundamentalism fit in? Ooh, this is a really good question. I could give my opinion. JJ, do you care to weigh in?
It's interesting because I feel like this is an opinion that noted TikTok superstar Dan McCullough has expressed on occasion.
Yeah.
And actually, like, I've been a big fan of his as his rise to fame has continued. And he made a quote that I really liked once, where he sort of said, like, like, religion doesn't create.
I'm going to attempt to turn this to manual focus. Keep going.
Okay. Yeah, he sort of said that, like, religion doesn't create culture, like man creates culture, and religion is just sort of along for the ride. And that's an interesting way. I mean, it's in some ways that's a very mainstream opinion, but in other ways it's a kind of challenging and provocative opinion, because for those who are skeptics of religion, it sort of presumes the idea that religion is actually a much less relevant variable than I think some critics of religion often presume, right? Like, is religion truly making man do the things that he does? Is it making man sort of structure societies the way he does? Like, is religion the reason why the Christian world is one way and the Islamic world is another way? Or are these sort of cultural differences perhaps dictated by other variables, and the religion is just kind of like adapted and molded and used as a rationalization for things that people were going to do anyway?
Yeah. I mean, I really think that seeing religion as technology is very underrated. I think people think of religion as having this substance that's different than any other thing. Like, it's in some way like it's a natural organism. Some people think of it that way, and then of course people think of it as like this mystical force. Some people think of it as like a mind virus. And I really think that just thinking about it as a tool, which is created by people but also creates civilization, is the best way to look at it. I mean, we look at the American political system and like American civic religion as a technology that was purposely invented by these people who were purposely inventing it for a specific purpose.
Mm.
And while religion, while like Christianity, for example, was not in one fell swoop invented in the same way that, like the American political system might have been invented in a relatively, arguably, a shorter time.
Yeah.
Um, I still think that even with Christianity naturally developing some features through what I would call like memetics, it also had some features that were given purposely, that were designed in by people like ancient pastors who might have written the pastoral epistles, who basically want to structure society by subjugating women to men.
Yeah.
So my point is, it doesn't really matter if the structures within something like Christianity got there naturally through some kind of evolutionary process, or if they got there intentionally through design. I still think you can see it as technology. And so, the question is like, religion changes to fit people's needs. Yeah, like technology changes to fit people's needs. I mean, when people have, like, when World War II came about, for instance, example I like to give is, after the war, we had a lot of economic prosperity. We had a lot of room to grow, expand into. There's still a lot of empty land. And I think that, even people in the American government were like, all right, the post-war project is to grow and expand and to like fill the continent with like these nuclear families, or
Yeah.
at least with successful, wealthy people.
Yes.
And so the American kind of evangelical project of the 50s was, a man leaves his home, his parents, he gets a job, and as soon as he's financially stable, he marries a woman, and then she gets pregnant, and then they have as many kids as possible,
Mm.
and they have a home that they live in. They don't live in an apartment, they live in a house.
Mm.
And this is a way to populate and enrich, like literally make people rich in a huge area and grow as a national power.
Mm.
And so Christianity has uh, sacralized families that could not be described as a nuclear family. They sacralized virginity and celibacy
Yes.
for thousands, almost 2,000 years. And then suddenly it's all about getting married and getting pregnant and having kids. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, that's a way that religion adapts to meet people's needs. People purposely change religion to meet people's needs. And I think that's a very good example of that. But it happens more incidentally. I think religion naturally evolves under selection pressures like an organism. So yeah. How does fundamentalism fit in? Extreme tribalism, groupishness is extremely useful when a group is under threat. Like the Sikhs that we were talking about
Yeah.
earlier perceive themselves at least to be under threat by encroaching cultures around them. So they're very defensive, and they work this into their theological system.
Yes.
So I think that fundamentalism is just, it's a much sharper instrument, much sharper tool, but it's comes kind of from maybe the same substance.
I like that. I like that idea of thinking of religion as a technology. The thing I was thinking about as well when you were talking sort of like post-war America, it's like in addition to sort of the usefulness of Christianity and sort of rationalizing a certain kind of nuclear family, of course, the rise of the religious right that we're still sort of dealing with today, like that was a useful technology in the sense of like mobilizing support for a conservative political project. It breathed
Mhm.
new life into the Republican Party. It sort of helped create a sort of permanent coalition that could be mobilized against the communist threat
Yeah.
and sort of
Yeah.
rationalize a certain foreign policy that, Americans sort of in the foreign policy sort of universe felt mattered a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's interesting. In the same way that, you can look around the world and you can see the way that, like say in like when Saddam Hussein is trying to fight against the Americans or whatever, he mobilizes religion as a way to sort of give legitimacy to his otherwise secular regime and sort of make, defending his odious dictatorship
and
something
and this is
grander.
why I think people make very persuasive arguments about, fundamentalist Islam is, um, in part kind of like the fault of interventionism by
Yeah.
like kind of like colonialist type powers. And like, that's a very complex argument, but
Yeah.
I think that there are arguments to be made about how fundamentalism is often a reaction to
Mm,
perception of the encroachment of like a more powerful
yeah.
force.
Or you could even like you could also just say that when a group perhaps like if a group is struggling, it doesn't necessarily have to be because someone has made them struggling. Some societies might just be sort of dysfunctional for all sorts of secular reasons, and then religion becomes an attractive way to believe that actually they're destined for greater things,
Yeah.
and even though they might be suffering materially or geopolitically, they actually have something greater
And
good than
that is the Hebrew Bible.
yes.
All right, let's move on
Yes.
to the next one. What do we got here? How do you handle conspiracy theories? I struggle with patience.
Mm,
When I talk about conspiracy theories on my channel, you guys have got to realize, and I'm going to talk about this in a video soon. There is a long process between me hearing the thing that I'm going to respond to and actually filming my response to it. So you're never seeing me just off the cuff react. You're seeing me after having conversations with my wife and my friends and doing a lot of writing and research, finally give my thoughts. So the way that I stay patient, public facing is I just take some time to study it and take care of myself mentally and then react to a camera alone in a room. And you'd be surprised how easy it is to come off calm that way.
but what is your off the cuff reaction? Do you get mad?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, especially like to the kind of like anti-vax type stuff.
Mm,
Stuff that has like the 5G tower stuff. I mean, it's dumb and it can be very harmful, but when it has something directly to do with like medical issues, that
yeah.
really gets under my skin.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you?
It triggers me as well. Like I find the QAnon stuff just like so odious and just so off-putting. And
Yeah.
it does make me angry that people can be that dopey and that they can be manipulated by just such obvious hogwash, right? And it just makes me like, are you moron, But then no, it's true. Like you can take time and you can sort of think through it. And when you're in sort of positions like ours, you can make like a video and you can script it out and it's all very calm and it
Mm.
makes you seem like you have this very like rationalistic, like intellectual engagement with even the most sort of preposterous things and you're fundamentally unemotional. But yeah, that's like a long process and people don't
Yeah.
see the way that we get there. And yeah, we have intense emotional reactions to this kind of stuff just like anybody else does.
Yeah. All right. What do we got up next, Eric? What
What
do
do you
you
guys
guys
think
think
about
about
black
black?
Israelites? Have you ever
Is this the like the black Hebrew Israelites?
yeah, like the sort of folks that like are often protesting in Washington D.C.
Yeah, I mean, I won't speak too much on it just because I feel like I'm relatively ignorant about it. I get the general concept, and it seems to me that this is rather extreme and very conspiratorial group.
Yeah.
But I don't know about their concrete actions. Like, are they actually involved in radicalizing people within governments or committing any kind of like acts of violence? I don't
I
know.
mean,
So
they don't, as far as I know, like they don't seem to have any real political expression except as a fringe group.
so
Sort of like
they're just wackadoodles.
well, it's sort of like it's akin to like like the Lyndon LaRouche people,
Mm,
or sort of like there's some groups in sort of American culture that I feel like are just fringe, and they stay on the fringe, right?
mm,
Like there's some fringe groups that do gain in influence, like my old pals, the Fallen Gong, right, which is like a fringy cult, but like I think you can make the argument that it has some degree of political influence. It certainly did during the Trump administration. But the Black Israelites, I just don't see any way in which you can sort of like make the argument that they have any sort of sway on anything. I think of them as being akin to like the Lyndon LaRouche people or someone like these real radical, like weird Marxist, like ultra dogmatic, like communist groups that sometimes put up the posters, in college campuses that are like stand with North Korea, stand with Cuba, this kind of thing. Like there's some weird fringe groups in American life that I think are just happy to stay on the fringe, and they're so bizarre that it's hard for them to gain any traction beyond
mm.
the most committed.
All right, what do we got next? Faith diverts attention from what real people do, good slash bad, reinforcing their lie plus denying credit to the deserving, which could fight biases. Discuss. I'm not sure I entirely understand the comment. I do see, I get a lot of comments that are somewhat like this, saying, like faith in its fundamental form is distracting from real issues because it's based on like factual inaccuracies. And I definitely have reasoned that way for a long, or I in that way for a long time. And now that I see religion as, it's like Yeah, I mean, I think that a hammer is a really inappropriate tool if you're like making a Fabergé egg, or if you're doing most things. But sometimes there's a nail, and sometimes that's the best tool to use, or at least it's an appropriate enough tool to use. So I don't know that I agree that faith, even when that has to do with belief in like supernatural agents, which I think is kind of a ridiculous idea personally. I'm not sure that that always plays out in this exact way that I think that like Christopher Hitchens and Richard Dawkins say it does. Um, a lot of people have a religious faith and they walk around with that in a little compartment and they make very rational decisions about most things. And they're just as rational, just as functional as anybody else, including an atheist. And then when it comes to needing, kind of like what you were saying, needing some ritual, needing some structure, needing some way to connect with other people, needing holidays, or just needing a little bit of personal reassurance, that's when faith comes in. And I think that a lot of Americans actually do have a faith that's somewhat like that. Now, obviously, not like the conservative evangelical, more uh, the people that we're seeing like really struggle to maintain power, try to maintain power today. Um, but yeah, I reinforcing their lie and denying credit to the deserving. This is absolutely something that happens that religious people do. That they like get cured of cancer through chemo, and then they're like, oh, thank God, and they never thank their doctor.
Mm,
But there are a lot of people who will say, you know, thank thank God that he allowed me to have this experience, but also my doctor was so incredible, and I really think that faith and being rational in your everyday life and having the right priorities, I don't think that those are mutually exclusive things. I just think that we as atheists often see so many examples of this not being the case, like with I know with like extremists that get on TV, like with Michael Knowles saying that
yeah,
like transgenderism should be eradicated from public
yeah,
life because Jesus.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that's ridiculous, obviously, but I don't think like the average American, if you go to like, upstate New York or something, that's not really their attitude as much. I mean, what do you say?
I mean, I don't even think somebody like Michael Knowles like believes that on the basis of faith.
Yeah,
Like, I think he's
yeah.
just like a right wing political, guy, and Christianity is a sort of way to give some gloss to an
Towing the
opinion.
line. Yeah.
Yeah, like, but I heard interesting like sort of definition of faith recently, where they talked about like how the concept of faith has sort of like devolved in some ways, and like faith used to be sort of like a tool, a technology, if you will, that we use to kind of fill in the gaps in our lack of knowledge, right?
Yeah.
Like when man sort of had less sort of sophisticated understandings of the world and so forth, like having faith kind of filled in the gaps. Like, God was sort of the architect behind some of the mysteries of life. And the problem now is that I think faith is often just kind of like used as a card to rationalize fundamentally irrational belief systems. It's like, well, that's just what I believe.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like not, I think, the traditional definition of faith, which has been a sort of like a trust in the unknowable. And now faith is being used as a way to opt out of knowing things that we can objectively know,
Mm.
So
I think that's a good answer too. Okay, so I don't want to keep my producer Eric too long, so we're really going to need a rapid fire. If you guys want to thank Eric, I highly recommend that you like super chat, and I'll give everything that you super chat from this moment on to Eric. But I can't guarantee we can actually answer that question. So we're going to rapid fire these questions and get through as many as we possibly can in the next. Eric, can we do like 7 more minutes? Are you okay with that? Um, all
of
right,
course
all
he
right. He
says.
says, "Of course," with a little heart.
Nice.
All right, we're gonna try to wrap this up in the next few minutes. But let's go. Are you guys going to Austin City Limits this weekend? Hell no. If so,
What is this?
it's a really big music
Oh,
festival.
yeah.
I believe it's actually South by Southwest.
Okay. Oh, I've
But
heard of this. Yeah.
JJ and I are both big sticks in the mud. We would both rather go to the Austin Public Library like we did today and just sit and read.
Yes, yes.
We're not we there's too much drinking and debauchery there for me. Okay. Are there any interesting or worrying conflicts on the horizon as religious nuns become politically or culturally relevant in North America?
Interesting or worrying conflicts on the horizon as religious nuns become.
So like I have said, I think that conservative Christians and conservative Muslims are going to continue, as they're starting to do now, to band together to fight the generally just the liberal, the progressive agenda, and most nuns are going to be on that side. However, I do think that as people just kind of lose their interest in religion, they're probably going to go over and there will be a sizable portion of people that will just be conservative in their disposition, want to fight progressivism and whatever else, and will join with the Muslims and the Christians in that. So I think that we're going to continue to see a conservative liberal divide in America, but I think that the religious demographic groups that make up those two groups is going to change somewhat. I think that right now the religious nuns are overwhelmingly liberal or like vote Democrat and maybe even overwhelmingly like kind of progressive. But I don't think that's always going to be the case, especially once nuns become a majority. I mean, in Europe, conservatives aren't always religious.
No, not at all.
So,
In fact, and I mean, I think that shows in some ways like that religion can be a more expendable variable than we sometimes think. I mean, there's lots of social conservative parties in Europe that are aggressively secular and yet support many of the same positions that the evangelical right-wing parties in America support.
sure.
One conflict though that I do see on the horizon is the issue of like religious liberty and sort of like what you can get away with doing in as justified by, well, this is just an expression of my faith, you know, like the cake baker denying service to gay
Yeah.
couples and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. And I think right now in America, you have a Supreme Court that's very partial to a very maximalist interpretation of religious liberty. So I think that even as America overall becomes more secular and perhaps less tolerant of using religion as a rationalization for doing various, you know, say discriminatory activities, I think you're going to have a judicial system that is going to be very sort of elevating of the rights of these otherwise unpopular and un, unpowerful religious minority communities.
All right. How about you read this one?
Okay, do you think the Canadian government will revisit the Online News Act or Bill C-18? I see people blaming Meta for blocking Canadian news, especially during the wildfires and evacuation, rather than blaming the law itself. So this is like, of
I'm out
course,
on that one.
this is like the issue that everybody wants to talk to me about these days. So like, this is the Canadian government's various legislative moves to kind of regulate the internet in various ways. All I can say is that definitely I think the government, the Trudeau administration, has like greatly underestimated how angry Canadians are at this, how bothered they are by it. Certainly, as somebody who's been very active in this, I'm constantly amazed at how many people just stop me on the street and want to talk about this specifically, government regulation of the internet. I think it has played a large role in sort of pushing young voters towards the Conservative Party. This is a big difference between Canada and America, is that young people are migrating very heavily to the Conservative Party. And if Trudeau loses the next election, it will be a large part because I think he's lost a lot of young voters in addition to everybody else. But you also make a good observation in the sense that, you know, tech companies are very demonized, like, and the Trudeau government has done what it's done on the basis that I think he's calculated that the public is not very sympathetic to the tech companies. And if the tech companies whine or if the tech companies do various things in response to government regulation of them, that the public will be inclined to give the government the benefit of the doubt much more than they will be willing to give the tech companies the benefit of the doubt. So I think that as far as politics goes, yeah, maybe, you know, Trudeau can maybe still win this one in the battle of public opinion.
Could God create free will without defying logic? How do you want to define God, free will, and logic?
Such an answer of you people.
Yeah, no, like that, but that's really the issue of all this stuff is that when you're trying to talk theology, like that's one of the reasons I dislike it so much, having these heady like theological and philosophical conversations is the majority of the conversation is just defining the term.
Hmm.
And I don't really see a lot of people spending a lot of time doing the prep work for constructive conversation when they're trying to talk theology or philosophy. Like, okay, let's define free will. It's going to take us 30 minutes to decide on a working definition. All right, let's define God now. That's going to take us another hour. Let's define logic.
Mm.
That's going to take us, another 15, 30 minutes, whatever. And of course, that's really boring. So people just get like right to the heart of it and give a very speculative answer, which of course someone can very rationally disagree with based on another set of definitions for all those words. And so these philosophical conversations that people just jump into with these very loaded terms, I find really boring. And it's one of the reasons I don't do debates, because you bring this up and I feel like people are often like, oh, well, you should read, I don't know, Hume, and then you use Hume's definition of such and such. Okay, can't we argue over the interpretation of what this dead philosopher thought this meant? Can't we? Isn't it debatable what Hume thought and defined as such and such? And so you're back to square one, even if you're wanting to say like, oh, let's use a libertarian, let's talk about libertarianism using the philosophy of John Locke. Like, okay, we can debate over what John Locke said about anything or what Hume said about anything. And so could God create free will without defying logic? Yes, no, maybe. All of the above could be said, depending on how we want to define any of this. I think I'm sorry. I don't mean to be like demeaning. I see very few people give this answer, and it's really personally frustrating to me.
Is free will a modern concept?
Ooh, that's a good question. See, this is where I think actually studying like philosophy and the history of philosophy is very useful.
Yeah.
To see whether or not this is anachronistic, like thinking
Yeah.
of Christianity as always having this concept of free will or something.
Because obviously
I'm
there
not
was a lot
sure.
of sort of deterministic sort of flavors of Christianity over time.
Yeah, I really couldn't say.
Yeah.
That's a very good question. You guys in the chat, like, let us know if you happen to know about the evolution of the idea of free will. Have you ever heard of panentheism, different from pantheism? It's a view of God found in Kabbalah that I think most people haven't considered. Yeah, I mean, I have heard of this, but I'm not sure that I know the distinction between panentheism and pantheism well enough to say anything that's going to be useful about it.
What is the root word of the two words?
Panentheism?
Yeah.
I mean, like pan is like all.
Yeah.
Pantheism is this idea that God is everything and
Yes.
is in everything. Everything makes up the mind or substance of God.
But then
Panentheism.
panenthe, what is that?
I mean, I think that the theism stays there distinct, but
Yeah.
panen, I don't know what the extra en means.
Oh.
Let's see, Caitlin, if you're still around, let us know. Maybe I'll try to cover this at some point. I'm sorry I can't answer this well. All right. Do we have anything else?
Yes.
As an atheist who is a classical liberal, I find that I'm in two camps because so many classical liberals are theists. It can feel a bit isolated. Yeah, I mean, I can understand that, especially because I think classical liberalism has this very rich intellectual history that goes back to someone like John Locke, right? Who justified his ideas by I was talking about this earlier today with you. He would directly say this, these rights came from God. Liberty is a
Yes.
divine right that we cite God as the base of. And so I can understand why that would be kind of swarmed with or populated by theists. I do have like some sympathy for people who are kind of more, even though I'm not conservative, I have sympathy for people who are secular and conservative in America, especially atheist and conservative. Jeez. You're kind of politically homeless. And I've had people come to meetups, like atheist meetups, and tell me this like in secret, like, I'm an atheist and I'm a conservative, so like evangelicals hate me.
Yes.
And like most conservatives don't like me, and atheists hate me even more.
Yes.
Because most atheists are actually progressives.
Yes.
And so while that's someone outside of my camp, it doesn't stop me from having compassion for them and wanting to empathize with them.
I think it's very difficult to be a secular or let alone atheist conservative these days in America, the party has just become so much more religiously dogmatic, so much more religiously explicit. When you like look at sort of speeches that are given at CPAC, the Great Conservative Gathering, people are
Yeah.
literally saying like, we are in this movement to do Christ's will and bring about a biblical government and like all this kind of
Whatever
stuff.
that even means.
Yeah, but it's like it's very explicit, and a lot of like the great sort of atheist conservative intellectuals, like say George Will, or have been driven out of the Republican Party. They no longer feel like they belong there. So a lot of these people have actually become Democrats and just kind of work with the conservative wing of the Democratic Party to the extent it exists. So.
All right, so we've run over our time. Let's do one more, and then I've got to call it quits. Question
for JJ. With all of your dislike of Quebec, okay, this is already a false premise, and its influence, would you be okay with a Canadian national divorce of sorts? Well, this is actually sort of like one of the it's like a very popular idea that like common people in Canada often express, the idea that we should just negotiate separation with Quebec rather than sort of forever be kind of like blackmailed by the threat of Quebec separatism. In fact, there's polling that suggests that the idea of splitting up with Quebec is actually more popular outside of Quebec than it is inside of Quebec. But I mean, my opinion on it, and it's not like a dislike of Quebec or anything like that, but I do think that Quebec's destiny should ultimately be decided by Quebecers. And, I don't think that we should be forever sort of cowed by Quebec's blackmailing of the rest of Canada. But I do think that fundamentally, Quebecers have to decide what their place is in Canada. And I don't really think it's the position of the Canadian government, one way or another, to exert too much influence on that question, right? Like, I don't think it's a matter of like us trying to continuously like bribe or deceive or flatter Quebec into sort of staying part of Canada. I think Quebecers have to look at what Canada offers them, and they have to be able to make their own rational decision if that's a deal worth, being a part of or not.
Wait, so you're saying that you don't hate everyone in Quebec?
No, I love Quebec. I've been to Quebec many times. I think it's a great province. I like it very much. I like some of the actions of their government, and I don't like the way, frankly, I don't like the way that the Canadian government interacts with Quebec.
That sounds like my answers on religion, and yet people still think that I like hate religious people or something, or that I love religious people too much, whatever. These are complex things. But guys, yeah, thank you so much for donating. Eric is getting a nice hefty tip tonight. Everyone say a good thanks to Eric for running this stream. Again, that is Eric from Skeptic Generation, very good friend of mine. And of course, thank you to JJ for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's such a thrill to be here in the Genetically Modified after watching you for so many hours.
Oh, maybe one day I'll be in your little studio apartment filming with the echo.
With my Gigaw covered. Yeah, this place is really quite amazing. The audio quality in here is out of this world.
Yeah, and guys, again, this is a rare thing for me. I would like to stream more often because I enjoyed this, but just thank you guys for sticking through the technical hiccups. I know it wasn't perfect. The audio focus or the autofocus was rather annoying. But yeah, we'll try to do better next time. And
yes.
JJ, I'm sure that we will be collaborating at some point. I'll absolutely get you to draw another thumbnail for me. People loved your thumbnail that you made for me that one time.
I loved drawing it. It was lots of fun. It was very flattering that you took inspiration from one of my videos to make one of your own. So
yeah, well, the next video will probably also take inspiration from yours. You already know what it is, but they don't get to know. Yes. So, okay, guys. Well, much love to everyone. Stay skeptical. I'll probably add resources in the description if you're an apostate in need, as I always do. But go be nice to each other. Be nice to each other in the comments.